Hello everyone. This video is a continuation from the previous one, which we covered from Isaiah 1, chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. This video is going to cover the second half of chapter 1. So before we begin, it's a good idea to just review the structure. Verse 1 was the title of the chapter, and then we talked about the national situation, verses 2 through 9. And then we talked about the religious situation, 10 through 20. In this video, we're going to dive into the social situation of Israel, which is 21 through 26. And then the chapter is going to end with the tension between threat and hope. There's going to be both of that, depending on how people of Israel deal with these sins in the national level, religious level, and the social level. All right, so chapter 1, verses 21, picking up from 21. How the faithful city has become a whore, who was full of justice. Righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers. Your silver has become dross, with your best wine mixed with water. Your princes are rebels and companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. So we talk about this bribe and this injustice. So again, we're talking about the social aspect of the sin of Israel at this time. Okay, so pay attention to that. Continuing on, 23. They do not bring justice to the fatherless, and the widow's cause does not come to them. There's a reason why the early church in Acts, by the way, dealt specifically with the widows, because that is like the thing to do. That is the target people that you need to serve if you're really trying to live a just and righteous life, because that's what God had said over and over again from the Torah. Anyway, verse 24. Therefore the Lord declares, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, I will get relief from my enemies and avenge myself on my foes. I will turn my hand against you and will smelt away your dross as with lye, and remove all your alloy. So God is saying now, you are my enemies. Did you see that? I will get relief from my enemies and avenge myself on my foes. Who is this enemy? I first thought it was the Gentile nations, but like if you read it in context, it's Israel. Why are they called God's enemies? Because they're not living out the justice and the righteousness that God had called them to live out. They're oppressing the poor, the widows, and so on. If you're doing that, God says, you're my enemies. That's harsh, but that's what God is calling his very own people. You're my foes, and I will avenge myself on my foes. Verse 26, and I will restore all your judges as at the first, and your counselors as at the beginning. Afterward, you shall be called the city of righteousness and faithful city. Okay, so but God is not talking about restoration that is going to come, but afterward you shall be called the city of righteousness. But I forgot to mention one thing in verse 25. It says, I will turn my hand against you. The translation against you, against, is a little misleading, I think. It's possible to translate as I will turn my hand against you, but I think it's more like, it's better to understand that after a time of abandonment, the Lord will put his hand upon them again. He will return his hand again upon Israel for purification. Because in 25 and 26, we're talking about the restoration after vengeance. So I will turn my hand against you, meaning I will bring my hand against you for the purpose of restoration, and will smelt away your dross as with lye, and remove all your alloy, and the result will follow to be that you will be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. Okay, verse 27. Zion shall be redeemed by justice, and those in her who repent by righteousness. But rebels and sinners shall be broken together, and those who forsake the Lord shall be consumed. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about this tension between threat and hope now. The social situation we just now finished covering. We're moving on to, so what's gonna happen? People who repent, and there's gonna be people who rebel and keep walking in this way of sin, and they're gonna meet two different ends. But sadly, as always, the description about the sinners and the ways of the rebels is longer than the description of the redeemed people. Like in Leviticus 26 or Deuteronomy at the end, there's blessings and curses. Generally, curses are get the longer part than the blessing. It's because human nature is that we're probably gonna be sinful. Anyway, so now we're diving into the transition of the promise of purification and the destruction of rebellious people. Verse 29, for they shall be ashamed of the oaks that you desired, and you shall blush for the gardens that you have chosen. For you shall be like an oak whose leaf withers, and like a garden without water. Then the strong shall become tinder, and his work a spark, and both of them shall burn together with none to quench them. So God is saying, those who rebel and walk in sin and do not repent will be ashamed of the oaks. What's oaks here? They shall be ashamed of the oaks that you desired. You shall blush for the gardens that you have chosen. Somebody asked an interesting question to me about this verse. And oaks is Elim in Hebrew. El is God. Okay, like Beit El, Bethel is house of God, right? Oaks is Elim. So Elim can have both meanings. It can be gods in plural, God in plural, or oaks. And the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament that was translated about almost 300 years before Jesus was born, it translates this Elim, oaks, into eidolois, which is where we get the word idols from. So, in other words, for they shall be ashamed of the idols that you desired. You shall blush for the gardens that you have chosen. So, I think Isaiah used this term for double meaning. So, Elim can refer to idols, but it also does refer to like a physical tree. And it's because trees were often used and associated with cultic activities. People probably did idol worship at the tree, around the tree, or worship the tree itself. But either way, the oaks that you desire really can mean the trees or the idols that they desired. So the end of it all is that people who do not repent will be ashamed, and the strong shall become tinder, and things will go bad. This is just a brief way of saying what will happen to the people who do not repent. So that's the end of chapter 1. So overview, title, this is the prophecy of Isaiah during the kings of ... We have the national situation, we have the religious situation, we have the social situation, and then we end the chapter with tension between the threat and hope. What are you going to do about this? Those in her who repent will be redeemed, but those who don't will be ashamed. So this is like the intro to introduction for the rest of the book of Isaiah.